remember him for the land that he held or the title that he bore. They remember John Clifford for a name whispered in contempt and fear. Not Lord, not Baron. The Butcher.
John Clifford was born on the 8th of April 1435, almost certainly here at Skipton Castle, which was the seat and central power of his family. The Cliffords were not southern courtiers or polished diplomats. They were old northern stock, warlike, loyal to Lancaster and hardened by moorland and feud.
His mother, Joan Dacre, came from the powerful northern Dacre bloodline, which tied Clifford to one of the most influential houses in the region. His father, Thomas Clifford, the 8th Baron Clifford, Lord of Skipton, was already an experienced fighting man in a kingdom sliding towards civil war, a realm where Richard, Duke of York, and Richard Neville were rising in power and ambition. John was his heir, raised in expectation of command. But history didn't wait for him to grow into it. In May 1455, the realm cracked at St Albans, the first battle of the Wars of the Roses. Thomas Clifford rode for King Henry VI, but it was the House of York that struck first. Richard, Duke of York, and Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the man who would become the Kingmaker. Their men cut through the Lancastrian line in the streets of St Alban and the gardens of the town. Baron Thomas Clifford, John's father, was slain there. Some have said that York's household knights struck him down, others blamed Richard Neville's men, but it didn't really matter who swung the final killing blow. For the Clifford heir, the meaning was the same.
John was 20 when the news reached him of his father's death. He inherited his father's lands, title, and a hatred for the Yorkists in the same breath. His loyalty to Lancaster was not just policy, it was carved into him by grief and a lust for vengeance.
The years that followed were not years of peace. Feuds simmered under banners, and northern lords chose their sides. Clifford did not forget about St Albans, and when Richard, Duke of York, marched north in the winter of 1460, Clifford was waiting in the shadows of Sandal. On the 30th of December, York left the safety of Sandal Castle, believing he faced only a small part of the enemy. The trap closed around him. Lancastrian forces, with Clifford among them, crushed the Yorkist army near Wakefield, and Richard, Duke of York, was slain by Lancastrian troops. But it wasn't Richard's death that would stain Clifford's name for centuries. As the rout broke and men ran towards Wakefield Bridge and the River Calder, a youth tried to flee alongside his chaplain, and that was Sir Robert Aspell. Edmund, Earl of Rutland, was just 17 years old. That bridge still stands today. First raised in stone in the 1340s, he was one of the key crossings of the Calder, carrying merchants, soldiers and pilgrims. On its span sits the Chantry Chapel of St Mary the Virgin, completed around 1356. Priests here said daily masses for the souls of travellers and for the dead of the town.
But the story most remember here is not one of prayer or salvation, it's one of pursuit and blood. But it was on this very bridge that Edmund Plantagenet's flight ended in tragedy.
Edmund wasn't just any boy. He was the son of Richard, Duke of York, who had been cut down only moments earlier. He was also the brother of the boy who would one day become Richard III. His eldest brother was Edward, who would soon become Edward IV. Younger than Edmund came George, Duke of Clarence, and then Richard, the last Plantagenet king. When Edmund died here at Wakefield, it wasn't merely a death in battle. It was a wound struck into the very bloodline of the House of York. The death of a son, the death of a brother, the death of a prince in all but name. Most accounts point to the same man as the killer, John Clifford. Some say the boy pleaded, some say he was silent. Some claim his tutor, Sir Robert Aspell, tried to shield him. The Tudor chronicler Edward Hall provided an account of the young Earl's fate and foretold eventually by Shakespeare in Henry VI, Part 3. As Edmund fled the field, in the company of his chaplain, he was captured by John Lord Clifford, one of the commanders of the victorious Lancastrians. He kneeled, imploring mercy before withholding up his hands and making dolorous countenance, for his speech was gone for fear. Clifford brutally replied, "By God's blood thy father slew mine, and so will I and all thy kin." He then stabbed the young, pleading Edmund through the heart with a dagger and told Sir Robert Aspel to take the news to his mother and brothers. Edward Hall remarked, "Clifford was accompanied a tyrant and no gentleman." From that moment forward, Yorkist chroniclers named him the Butcher, and the name followed him like a shadow. Edward of York burned with purpose after Wakefield. His father was dead, his brother was dead, vengeance rising in his chest like a second heartbeat. The Lancastrians fell back beyond the River Aire, taking ground around Ferrybridge. Clifford was there again, leading ambushes, harrying scouts, and leading the Yorkist advance where he could. Both sides fought over a broken bridge that the Lancastrian army had destroyed to stop the Yorkist advancing. John's fate would not wait for Towton. It found him the day before. On 28th of March 1461, in the fields near Dintingdale, east of Saxton, during the fighting linked to the Ferrybridge crossing on the eve of Palm Sunday. The clash at Dintingdale was short, savage and decisive. Clifford commanded his men in the chaos, and in that moment made a fatal choice. Contemporary accounts agree on this. He had lifted or removed the armour guard on his neck, the bavois above his sallet helmet, or the gorget that shielded the throat. He did it to be able to see clearly, to be able to shout commands, and to lead. The Lord Clifford, either from heat or pain, putting off his gorget suddenly with arrow without a head, was stricken into the throat, and incontinent rendered thy spirit, and in the Earl of Westminsterland's brother, John Neville, the turncoat at Wakefield. And all his company were almost there were slain, and at a place called Dintingdale, not far from Towton. One breath, one gap of exposed flesh, one life bled away in a bloody gasp for choking breath. A Yorkist war arrow struck him in the throat, not in a duel and not in glory, but in the cold precision of battlefield chance. John Clifford fell and bled out in the mud before the great slaughter of Towton had even begun. He was 25 years old. At Saxton, in this small stone church, the echo of Palm Sunday still lingers. Here men who fought and fell at Towton were buried in mass graves, their names lost, their cause forgotten by the living. And yet within these quiet walls the story of the Clifford line can still be felt, not in the grandeur of glory, but in the silence between these stones. Saxton's church stood witness to the storm of 1461. It stood when arrows darkened the sky and fell like rain, when the wind howled across the ridge line, when the sons of England cut one another down in snow and mud.
There is no evidence that John Clifford was buried here at Saxton Church. There's no inscriptions, no effigies, no tombs. There's nothing but a scream of vengeance that echoes through history. Many believe that John was buried where he fell, in the field, bleeding out with a Yorkist arrow in his neck. But others believe he was quite possibly brought here to the pits that surround Saxton of the village and the town hall, and buried with thousands and thousands of Towton's dead. But while there is no evidence that John's here, there is evidence of his family ties to his mother, Joan Dacre, with Randolph's grave outside, meaning there is a link to John Clifford here at Saxton.
Here lies another man of the same campaign, Sir Randolph Dacre, killed at Towton the day after John at Dintingdale, was kin to Clifford, his cousin through his mother's bloodline. These were two men from the same northern houses, fighting on the same side and dying on the same campaign. Two Lancastrian knights, one grave marked in stone, one lost to the earth. The Dacres, like the Cliffords, were bound to the north, proud, loyal and divided by a war that set neighbour against neighbour. Randolph Dacre fell fighting for Lancaster. His kin, the Dacres of Gilsand, would rise again in the service of kings. Here his tomb rests beneath the same roof that shelters Yorkist dead, the victors and the fallen, side by side, as though time itself had made peace where men could not. So why do we remember him? Because the death he dealt changed the course of a war. When Clifford killed Edmund at Wakefield, it did not just take the life of a fleeing boy, He killed the brother of Edward IV, he killed the brother of Richard III, and he helped set fire to a dynasty that would answer in rivers of blood at Towton. And when Richard, Duke of York himself, was cut down at Wakefield, the future Richard III, only 8 years old at the time, survived far from the field that killed his father and brother. John Clifford did not live very long, but the shadow that he cast stretched across kingships and chronicles. To some he was a murderer, others an avenger, and to others he symbolised the age itself, an age where vengeance was inheritance, mercy was weakness, and blood taught its own lessons. He was born in stone, raised in bitterness, and ended by an arrow and an inch of exposed flesh. Edward was not at Wakefield when his father and brother died. That wasn't because he was late arriving or hesitating. He wasn't there because he was already at war. At just 18 years old, Edward was acting like a commander in his own right. He was gathering men in the south and in the Midlands, moving through the Welsh marshes, building an army from loyalty and fear. While Richard, Duke of York, Edward's father, held the north, Edward was securing the south, working alongside Warwick. And then the message reached him. His father, dead on the field. His brother cut down trying to flee by John Clifford. He marched north hastily with the weight of a family's death behind him. He joined Warwick and struck hard at Mortimer's Cross, and he drove the Lancastrians back to the frozen rivers of Yorkshire. And there, on the fields of Towton, he took command of the Yorkist army. Towton was not just a battle, it was an annihilation of the Lancastrian troops. And in that vicious letting of bloodshed, suffering and death as the snow fell and the biting wind howled, Edward claimed victory. At 18 years old, the crown became his, and somewhere in that victory, under the weight of all that vengeance, the boy who had lost a father and a brother vanished forever, and a king rose from the field to rule England. After the Battle of Wakefield, their heads were cut off and displayed on spikes over the Micklegate bar in York as a public humiliation by the Lancastrians, with Richard, Duke of York, having a paper crown placed on his head. Edmund's head was also displayed next to his father, along with his uncle Richard Neville, the 5th Earl of Salisbury. When they were initially interred at Pontefract Priory, they were buried without their heads. It was only after Edward secured the throne he ordered the heads to be retrieved and reunited with their bodies at Pontefract. In 1476, the remains of both father and son were ceremoniously exhumed from Pontefract and reinterred in the family mausoleum at the Church of St Mary and All Saints of Fotheringhay. After winning the battle at Towton, Edward, the future King Edward IV, entered York only to find his father's head still on the bar. He retaliated by executing Lancastrian supporters, whose heads then took the places of his brother and his father.
I do think it's unfair to call John the Butcher. He was born in a chivalrous age. He was the son of a baron, Lord Clifford of Skipton, so it would have been an expected trait for him to want to fight for his family, his bloodline, and of course the Lancastrians. Some may say that John was a murderer for taking revenge at Earl of Rutland on the bridge, but I can kind of associate with how he felt. He fought for what he believed in. He fought for all those things we've mentioned, and he got revenge. Was it right? Was it wrong? Well, he died on his sword, and of course we know he died for his sins. This video has been such an honour for me to be able to go to these places, these locations, these battlefields, the bridges, the churches, where these people really breathed and fought and died. It's such a strange thing for me because it brings up emotions that I can't really explain. Sometimes I feel quite emotional, especially when I go to places like Saxton and here at Towton. There's a real feeling to the battlefield. I almost feel like I can reach out and touch these people, and I hope that if John is watching from the other side, he feels that I've done his story and everybody else's story in this video justice, and I did it with honour. It's been an absolute joy. I hope one day I can have the values that these people did. Maybe I'm living in the wrong age. May John Clifford, all the Cliffords, Richard Duke of York, Earl of Rutland, may they all rest in peace.